Welcome back to Pokey Mechanical. Today, well not today, there's going to take a couple of days this project, but we are putting on a turbo kit onto a 1.8Z in this 75 series. So the customer supplied all this equipment. I'm not 100% sure if everything's here. I've gone through it and basically all the main components are here. Obviously the turbo, dump pipe. I've got an intercooler here, I'll just grab that. So this intercooler is really well constructed. It's got the factory plate for the intake manifold right there. So that'll be a top mount jigger. And it's got a bonnet scoop that'll be going on the top to be allowed air to get into the intercooler as well. Came with this as the manifold. It looks like it's a stainless steel cast manifold. We've got all the drain stuff for the turbo, and we've got a Pro Vent oil catch gang that's going to go on to control any of the blow-by and stuff like that, breathing coming out of the engine to make sure it keeps it nice and clean for going back into the intake. Alright, let's get all this gear ready to go on, but first of all I've got to get the car stripped down. Exhaust manifold's got to come off, and I've got to make an exhaust for this car as well, so you get to see that over a couple of videos. Righto, so first bit that you need to take off is your intake, and then next part is this. I'll get this off. I've just got a bracket underneath there to be able to undo. Righto, we'll take that piece off, and then we'll make sure we cover this so we don't drop anything down in the intake and lose any nuts and bolts or anything in there and have any misfortune end up going inside the head behind the valves. So at the back of the manifold here, there's a nut that's just caught on a thread and it's just spinning on the stud and it's not coming loose. So just trying to jam this breaker bar into the gap to try and make it so it pushes the nut down onto a thread to get it so it'll come undone. Hopefully we can get it to come undone. Oh. I've had hell getting this manifold off. Every single stud that I pulled out came out with the nut on. There's one last one in this rear part of the housing. So I've got all the studs out. I had to extract the last stud out that didn't come out with the nut. And once I actually got that one out, I've split the manifold because it's a two-piece manifold in this. And I can lift that bit out, and now I reckon I can get a grinder or something, Recipro saw or something like that in there on that nut that I still can't see now this is out of the way. Absolutely painful job, this one, to get that out when they're all rusted in. Time to keep going. I need to get that one off, then we can start putting the turbo on. Different blade than that. Yep. Yeah, I don't think that blade there's quite capable of doing that job. That's that. So we're into another day of getting this manifold off the Toyota. Got to the stage I'm having to use a die grinder to cut it off. Absolutely nightmare of a job right now. So finally, with a lot of hard work and a lot of around, I got the manifold off. So now it's time to clean up the head, the face of it, and start putting the turbo on. We're on to actually getting the turbo and the manifold onto the engine. I've already test fitted the manifold to make sure it goes on straight and bolts up flat. So now taking it off, get these studs all in. We're going to put some Loctite on the threads and then wind them all the way in, and then mount the turbo to the manifold before putting it in. Simply because at the bottom of the turbo on the inside of the engine side, there's going to be a lot of issues with getting the spanner in there to tighten up those nuts. So I'm going to mount it to it before we actually get started putting it in. Right, so what I've got there is Inconel studs. Inconel studs are super strong, and you can do them up really tight without breaking them. And the other side of it is they don't stretch under heat. So a normal bolt, and the reason why I'm actually replacing the ones that come factory with the turbo kit, is these will heat up and become softer from the heat of that turbo spooling and obviously creating heat. And then what happens when they get soft, they stretch slightly, and then the nut, when it's on there, it stretches and then becomes further away from the actual surface of the turbo and becomes loose, and then your turbo gasket blows because your turbo bolts come loose. So we're not going to use them, using Inconel studs, and we've actually got a special lock nut to go on there, which is a stainless steel lock nut. First of all, need to get that mounted on there and get them. Right, so we've just got the 4-bolt flange. Turbo can go straight onto there, and while it's sitting on the bench, it's nice and easy to access these bolts that are going to be internal against the head. Make it easier to put the whole thing together and put it in. Just noticed while I'm bolting this turbo on that this is actually designed really well by someone that has used their bloody brain, because they've allowed a load of room right at the inlet for the exhaust to the manifold, big enough that I can fit this massive ratchet spanner in there. Let me show you. So I can actually get that right in there. Easy as to do that up and spin it around, and if I had 2 hands to do it, I'd be able to do it up. Okay, so what you can see here is ratchet spanner fits perfectly on these nuts all the way around. So there's loads of clearance between the housing and the actual nut to be able to get decent sized socket or spanner on every single one of these. It is really well designed, I like it. Thumbs up to JB. So what I really like about these Inconel studs is literally how tight you can do these up and they don't break. Like, you can put a massive amount of force on these compared to what you can with one of these type of bolts. And the other advantage, as I was saying before, is they don't stretch when they get hot. Forgot to film this part, quite an important part of the actual process of fitting a turbo to a previously non-turbo engine. And that is the oil drain. So I've got the oil drain welded in. You can see it's welded right around the outside there on the outside of the sump. But the other thing I've done is actually try to turn this over. I've actually welded it right there on the inside as well. So it is sealed 100%, both sides, inside and out, with the TIG welder. Okay, so what we've got here is the oil boss, or fitting that the oil filter bolts onto. So that normally is inside the engine, filter bolts onto this thread here. So now what we've got to insert is this piece here, that screws into the engine. Then we have our sandwich plate that will sit on there, and then this screws into that section here, and the filter will bolt straight onto that face of this. So now that we've got that piece out, we can screw that one into the engine. I just wanted to clean these. Always, whenever you pull something like this out of an engine, you've got to make sure that anything on there is not damaged. You've got to make sure all that thread looks perfect and it all looks good. That way we know we haven't picked up any burrs that might be inside that motor and allowing an issue with the oil delivery for the new turbo. Yep. Alrighty, here we have the exhaust system for the Landcruiser, all welded up, ready to go. I missed actual fabrication of this, but I did fabricate all this myself. It was my first attempt at a full exhaust system like this. I've done bits and pieces of patching exhaust together. But this is my first attempt at doing a full exhaust, so I'm pretty proud of this. And yeah, time to put some black paint on it and get it back in the vehicle. What's that? Yeah, that's what I think. Right, time to weld up the exhaust so we can finish it off, get it painted, and then get it in the car. Cool, that's ready to go in. It's a juggling act. Right, so we've got the intercooler plumbing from the turbo up through to the intercooler. Now I've just got to get this intake pipe here, got to cut it to length to get it to here. There's a join right there where there's an actual swage piece of metal in the middle, and we're just going to cut some off this to that. So we've just got to measure the distance from this point here, and that difference there is what we need to cut off down here. So we've got 45 mil here is the distance here, so that's what we'll measure on this piece down there and cut it off. All right, so a little trick when you're cutting a silicone hose like this, I measure that distance that we've got to do with the cutting, measure that down with a ruler to the edge of the cable tie. So wrap that around, squeeze it on. Once that's on there, use a little bit of WD-40, because what that does is as that knife goes in, that knife going into rubber will naturally grip on the rubber. The actual sides of the blade will grip. By having the WD-40 in there, it makes it a lot easier for your blade to just push through. You've got to be careful not to get too much pressure going and you don't slip out and cut your wrist. But by following the cable tie around, we can make sure that we follow that correctly. Oh, I've got to the join in the cable tie, come back this way. Normally I get them nice and neat and straight. But makes it a lot easier when you put the WD-40 on your silicone joiner to get that to work correctly. Now I can just slip that back on the other piece and put it in. That hose clamp's a little bit tight there, stopping that going in. Cool. Now put some hose clamps on it and I'm good to go.
The bonnet, it'd be good to see what it sounds like.
There's a bit more. Gonna fill up the coolant. One way we do that here is with this radiator funnel. So this comes with a whole heap of different fittings for different radiator caps, and you just pretty much put together the ones that are supposed to be put together. That one's got a B on it written right there, and this one's got a B on it just there. Don't know if you can see that in the camera, but if we put that on there, turn that around, push that in, we can take that out and start filling it. That's it. Handy little tool to be able to get your coolant level way up above all your heater and everything that's in the back of the motor to make sure you get coolant exactly where it needs to be, everywhere. We've got the turbo on, but we haven't got any oil pressure to it yet. So while I've got the coolant bucket there filling up, I've cracked the injectors and I've taken the fuel line off that goes to the diesel pump. And now I'm just going to crank it over to basically just build up oil pressure to the turbo to make sure it's got oil going in it. And then we should be able to put the fuel lines back on and tighten the injectors up and then get it started. So I'll get that cranked over now to build up oil pressure. Right, now that's done, I can plug this little electric lift pump back in. Right, let's crank her over and see if she'll fire. I might have to bleed the injectors off first. Oil pressure lights out, we're good to go. Oh. Beautiful, this is running like a dream now. Oh yeah! Very happy with this so far. Now we're going to do a little bit of just maintenance checks over, make sure the coolant goes in properly. The oil pressure light's gone out, so it's letting me know that oil pressure's there. But the gauge hasn't come up on the pressure gauge, so I need to check that something's not unplugged there, or I've probably pulled a wire off while I've been working on it. But otherwise, this is sounding really, really good and looking the goods too. Right, so the troopy is completely done. All the turbo, intercooler, exhaust, everything's on, ready to go. It's actually been away from here already, had a couple of Ks put on it and gone and had a dyno tune. And the owner's just called back in to say good day and say thanks because it is going absolutely phenomenal. He's really, really happy with the power, happy with how it's running. It's running sweet as it's ever run. And yeah, I'll just show you over the whole finished project. So the intercooler bolts direct to the factory manifold, no modifications were needed there. The exhaust manifolds looking a real nice colour actually, and everything just fits nice and neat, and nothing bad or untowards going wrong with it. It's fantastic. So you can see the factory airbox is retained, and then that goes down to the intake of the turbo, and then there's very limited piping required for the intercooler to get to the intercooler and then go straight across to the intake. Oh, he's already been out in the mud as well, got the bloody brand new exhaust all dirty. Excellent. So if you're after any of this sort of work in the future, give us a ring, we'll hook you up with a turbo kit for your Landcruiser.